Welcome to Conversations. This is Scott Turner. My guest today is Dr. Laurie Marker from the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. We have a long connection with Laurie here at ESF. I've known her for about 15 years, and we're very privileged to have her visiting here at ESF today. And Laurie, welcome to ESF. We're glad you could be here.
Thanks. Good to be back. And
one of the things about what you do, you run, I think, one of the probably one of the most successful private conservation operations in the world. The Cheetah Conservation Fund is based upon a ranch in Namibia, which of course is on the west coast of Africa. You've gone from a fairly small holding when I first met you to actually quite an impressive operation these days, and it's all been done on your own initiative and on the generosity of donors who have come along and helped you. But the lead up to the development of that is actually quite an interesting personal story. I wonder if you could share with us, why you decided to go to Namibia, why you decided to start the CCF, and what took you there.
well, that's I think a great story. I think to think back on, because I had no idea that I'd be having such an impact today. And I like cheetahs and have worked with cheetahs since the early 1970s. And I ended up in Namibia when it was Southwest Africa in 1977. And I was there with a cheetah and actually took it there. It was a captive-born cheetah. And cheetahs don't breed well in captivity. So where I had come from at the Wildlife Safari in Oregon, I ran their breeding program for cheetahs and was studying them very intently.
You were a vet tech there, weren't you?
I was, yeah. And I ran the veterinary clinic, and with that, every special animal came under my care, and the cheetahs were part of that. But they had just come in from Namibia, Southwest Africa, where throughout the world, the handful of cheetahs that had lived in captivity had all come from Southwest Africa prior to the Endangered Species Act and CITES stopping the export of wild animals into captivity. So learning how to breed them was, for all endangered species at that time, was a very complex situation. Today it's still a very complex situation because cheetahs don't breed well. But if you do breed them in captivity, back in the 70s, people wondered, well, we could take them back into the wild and teach them how to hunt. And it's not as easy as it sounds. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Primarily today, the loss of habitat, that there's really no place for these animals to go. But I did an early research project in the 70s and took a cheetah back to Namibia and taught her how to hunt, which meant I learned how to hunt as well. It had been a cat that I'd hand raised. We were successful, but really what I learned was that farmers were killing cheetahs like flies. And that's what got me to Namibia to begin with, and was there for an extended period of time and went around and learned a lot from the farming community about what their challenges were, what the landscape looked like. And I kept going back to not only Namibia but to other African countries, and kept coming back here to America and saying we had to do something. The wild cheetah was declining. It was declining primarily from human-wildlife conflict, that farmers were killing cheetahs in huge numbers, and as I learned, it had a lot to do with them not knowing much about the cheetah. So I kept figuring that somebody had to do something, and when nothing was done, I set up a foundation and moved from the United States to Namibia right after independence. And
that was in 1990.
It was in 1990, and I had gone from my work at the Wildlife Safari, where I was then based at the Smithsonian, where I was for about 3 years prior to going to Namibia, and left there and set up our foundation then in Namibia. Yeah. But I really had a Land Rover and went door to door talking to farmers to find out much more about what their issues were with cheetahs and how they were farming the landscape. Ranching, I think here in America we'd call it, because as you know, these are livestock farmers, and here in America we call them ranchers.
Yeah. You mentioned that the farmers were killing a lot of cheetahs. as I understand Namibian law, it's perfectly legal there if they're designated to be, or if the farmer decides it's a pest animal causing damage to your stock. But you know, the interaction with farmers down there raises an interesting question. You know, farmers, in my experience, have been people who have a very good knowledge of the land. You know, they're like hunters. They're very good natural ecologists, but they are very set in their ways, and it's hard to get them to change. But what was the misperception that these farmers had about the cheetah that was leading them to decide they had to be shot?
Well, so much of it really revolved around their perception of their livestock and livestock losses. They farm very extensively, so their livestock is out on the land. The ranches are huge. 10,000 acres is an average size ranch. So as their animals are just out in the bush, then, and I think this is a historic thing with livestock ranchers everywhere, is that then you get rid of predators. And if you see a predator, the perceived threat to their livestock is that you remove it instead of waiting for there to be any loss. So a lot of that perceived threat was actually causing the biggest problem. And understanding how the ranchers were ranching, you know, did they have extensive centers? Were they, you know, moving their animals a lot through camps? Did they bring their cows in during calving seasons? Did they have calving seasons? And all of those became really interesting to figure out why some people caught more cheetahs than others, and how those farmers actually ranch their livestock.
Mm-hmm. But you had to overcome some perceptions on the part of these farmers. You know, as I was mentioning, they tend to be very concerned about the health of their felt, of their livestock, and so forth. And they have to bring a lot of basic ecological knowledge to what they do if they're going to be successful. But you know, as you say, cheetahs were perceived to be a predator threat. But didn't they imagine that there were many more cheetahs there than actually were? I mean, wasn't that the big misperception you had to overcome?
Well, a lot of that was because in some areas, cheetahs go to what are called play trees, marking trees, which is where they've got huge home ranges, 1,500 square kilometers, that's, you know, about 800 square miles. Very large, and yet they were living more or less in low densities, but they live together as a group. So brothers will stick together their whole life. They form a coalition. As they get to be more territorial, they come into these play trees. And then some farmers who had the play trees or marking trees, if they were catching them in traps, that's how they removed them. They would catch them at the trap of the play tree, and you'd catch an entire family. So when you caught a whole family of maybe 2 or 3 brothers, you'd think, oh, there's lots of cheetahs. Or a mother with cubs, which could be up to 4 or 5, which is average, then they'd think there's lots. But as soon as you'd remove those males, that territorial group of males, it would open territories and more animals would come in. And so it was like acting like a vacuum. And then that farmer that was the catcher of the cheetahs, if cheetahs were covering like 20 farms that size, they would open up territories and the animals would come in. And that's the kind of misperception that as we started understanding more about how the cheetah was living on the land through radio telemetry and sharing back with the farmers and then stopping some of that, the farmers started realizing that maybe there weren't as many. And we started explaining to them how the densities were, and the farmers didn't know anything about the cheetah, and yet they were catching them and killing them as vermin. They're also a daytime hunter. And so the farmers would see them on the land where the leopard is out at night. And I'm not saying, you know, catch the leopard versus the cheetah, but them not understanding much at all about the ecology of these predators and how they were living. And they'd really prefer to have wildlife than they would to have our livestock. And we started learning about how the livestock that they were catching were under a month old, and so if you protected the month-old calves, you'd do much better.
Okay. Hold that thought, please, because we'll come back and explore it in our next segment. We're here with Laurie Marker. Please join us a little bit later. Thank you. Welcome back to Conversations. This is Scott Turner, and we're speaking with Laurie Marker of the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia. So in the last segment, Laurie, we were talking about some of the basic ecological knowledge you had to bring to bear to educate the ranchers there that, in fact, maybe shooting their cheetahs was not the best approach to dealing with their livestock problem. But that's I think is a signature of a really very broad approach you've taken to conservation down there. You know, coming to educate the ranchers on their own terms, and as we all know, they are a particular kind of person. They're very independent. You know, they have their own set ways of thinking about how things should be done. And one of the things that happened, I thought that was very impressive, was that you managed to overcome those misperceptions, but on their own terms. That is, you made them allies rather than opponents, and you've done similar things on a whole bunch of other things. And your approach really has been to approach the conservation of the cheetah not as a conservation of the cheetah per se, but the conservation of the entire ecosystem, which includes the natural ecosystem, which includes humans living in ecosystems in an economic way, conservation in the larger political and social contexts. All of those things need to be dealt with. That's been your approach. So I wonder if you could elaborate on some of the other dimensions of how you've approached conservation of cheetah as a kind of a holistic, to use a oft-used word, approach to the problem.
Well, as I went around originally and talked to the farmers and got so much information from them, I was looking at the systems of their land. And the systems, if they were having problems with cheetahs, or perceived problems, and they were catching them and killing them, and I ask a lot about the whys. And at the end of a several-year survey, the answers came out that they really wanted to understand more about how the cheetah was living in the ecology of the landscape, how it was moving through their farms. They wanted more understanding on basic wildlife management. They have these huge farms that are integrated, and with the integration, which is something that is contrary to most ranchers' thinking in the world, is that they had an integrated system of wildlife and livestock, and yet they had no training in understanding the ecology of the wildlife. And they, even though they were livestock farmers, they had been not all that well trained on livestock management. And then another aspect of it is they had no real understanding on environmental education. So they said, help us on those things. We are on the land, and we know a lot about our land, but we need to understand more about these principles. And so from that, it helped us really design a lot of our programs and working with them. And so if we ask a cheetah, or a farmer, well, if you caught a cheetah, could we come? And we are very interested in the basic biology of the cheetah. We wanted to collect blood, and we'd have the farmer, help us after we'd anesthetize it and get his hands on the animal. And all of a sudden they'd become much more interested in listening to the heartbeat and understanding what we were looking at. And then by putting a collar on the cat, and a radio collar, we'd share the mapping, and we'd say, can we put the cat out and we can find out where it's moving on your land. And then doing a lot of game counts and understanding the movement and understanding the habitat. If the habitat was thick in the thorn bush, would that reduce where the prey was? Where would the cheetahs be going? Where were most of the play trees? Where was the interaction between the cheetahs and their livestock and their wildlife? And what kind of management really were they doing? And so really engaging the farmers in those kinds of conversations made it, I think, much more real, as the fact that I was interested in them. And if I shared with them more about the cheetah, they became more interested in my interests because I was caring about them.
Yeah, it's my visits there indicates that it's a very, very successful program. You've gone from a fairly small single holding to actually quite a large group of holdings, nearly 44,000 hectares, as I understand it, and bringing that group of farmers in, as you say, was integral to it. But You know, in developing countries like in Namibia, you especially countries that have had a history of colonialism, and of course Namibia has had that for much of its political existence. You find two parallel economies that usually develop there, and you work primarily with what are called commercial farmers down there, the typically European descendants, German Afrikaans people who approach farming in the same way that most Westerners do, namely as a money-making venture. But there's a whole other agricultural sector there, which of course are known as the communal farmers, and these of course are descended or related to a lot of the indigenous tribes down there, and they approach agriculture and livestock in a very different cultural context, and you're actually starting to branch out, trying to apply this model to these other agricultural sectors as well. So I wonder if you could elaborate on why and how and the kinds of results you've been seeing so far.
Well, it's very interesting. Our communal farmers live in a subsistence lifestyle, and there hasn't really been many predator issues over there because there's no wildlife. But as I was talking about this integration of the wildlife, Namibia is very well known for our conservancies, where the government, after independence, started bringing wildlife into certain areas. And when you do bring wildlife in, then there is human-wildlife conflict. So we started working actively with these communities, and they basically, again, laid out what it was that they needed to know. And they were on the land, and they were having a lot of problems because they were living very poor. They don't have access to veterinarians, basically. They don't have the money to support veterinarians. They don't know about what parasitology is. They don't know if an animal's sick, what to give it a vaccination for. Those are things that, because they don't have the education. And so by understanding what it was that they needed, it allowed us to start understanding how to help them to reduce their human-wildlife conflict. So having healthy animals is one thing, because predators like the sick, the weak, the slow, and if you've got that within your herds, so often those are going to be the ones that predators, as they start moving in, are going to kill off. Understanding the management issues, that if you have holes in your fences, a predator can get in, and how to actually fix your fences. And we've developed programs where we've actually taught them farm maintenance. But we started farm training programs, and we've put over 3,000 subsistence farmers through training programs. They're with us for a week at a time. So we are a model farm. So that's what the farmers basically said originally. You like cheetahs, but you don't know what it is to actually live on the land. Well, we do, because we are farmers ourselves. We have cattle, we've got goats, sheep, livestock, guarding dogs, and we're able to put into practice the things that we've learned and then teach people at our model farm how to go about implementing it on their farm. And then with our extension officers or our educators, go into the communities and work directly with the farming communities on what their problems are. Success
of humans is obviously an integral part of conservation. You know, they have to have successful farmers no matter what culture they come from. Our guest is Laurie Marker. We will return shortly, and we hope to see you then. Welcome back to Conversations. Our guest is Laurie Marker. So Laurie, you know, we were speaking in the last segment about the centrality of education in helping to build a better life as part of the conservation ethos of cheetah. That you know, conservation is something where everyone wins, but education has been a real important part of that. It's ranged all the way from education of practicing farmers, whether they're of the commercial variety or the communal variety, to building a conservation ethos from the ground up, from grade school, from children, all the way up. And the World Bank has identified education in Africa as a critical problem. And one of the issues that they have brought up is that education in Africa, especially at the tertiary level, the university level, has run into kind of a logjam, namely that you have faculty in the universities that have come up in their careers in a certain kind of culture that favors education rather than research, and that there's a real logjam that has to be overcome to kind of build a culture of research in countries like developing countries like Namibia, to develop indigenous, local scientific talent that can basically come in and take over after we have gone. And you've been involved in a lot of education of children, I think all the way up through Polytechnic. I wonder if you could share with us some of your perspectives on that. You've been on the ground, on the front line, so to speak, down there, and what are your thoughts on how you would build scientific talent in a country like Namibia?
Well, there's a lot of talent, and starting there at independence in 1990, just seeing the numbers of the indigenous Namibians that had not had access to university level training. And then as they started going into university, to have mentors to be able to help get them on the ground, to learn how to do research, have access to the potential of a university like this has to bring into a place like Namibia. And the teachers, the professors oftentimes had not had the opportunity of conducting the research that they wanted. So we've taken it on as a very big step at CCF to grow the African scientists and give them opportunities. So we've engaged very closely with Polytech back in the, when we first set up, and have put nearly 100 young biologists through internships. These are 6-month internships. And as they've left CCF and they leave there, they come in as bright-eyed young people, and they leave being able to know how to write a scientific paper, conduct research, and to watch that growth makes me very, very proud. And we now have many of our students that have gone through and are in the environment and tourism management and agriculture management and education. So it makes me very proud to see how our education has actually affected them, but the development of the country, basically. We've also then been bringing other scientists and from other countries now, from Namibia down from other countries in Africa down to our center, and put them through training courses to also develop skills throughout Africa, but in the kind of systems that we believe in, we teach holistically, looking at the interface between humans, wildlife, research, cheetahs, predators, human-wildlife conflict initiatives. So we believe that it is very important. We've got master's students, PhD students, we've got things like a genetics lab, we've developed a veterinary clinic. All of these are important parts then of having access, because these students are very, very bright and they really want to learn, but it's having a mentor. We've got Namibian mentors now that we've trained, and they're the ones now that are doing the mentoring with their fellow Namibians.
What kind of institutions are these mentors in? Are they in faculty positions in the Polytechnic or the University of Namibia? What kinds of career paths are these mentors developing in?
Well, we've tried to keep as many as we can at CCF because we've tried to develop a research institute and then with that, many of the others are at places like the Polytech of Namibia, or going into some of the other NGOs. We've got a great desert research facility, or the University of, or the museums of Namibia, which have work on the ground throughout. The Etosha National Park, or the Ministry of Environment and Tourism. So we work closely together with all of these different institutions. But we've tried to really develop within the University of Namibia and the Polytech professors that we can do collaborative research with.
Do you think you're getting to the kind of critical point where it can be self-sustaining, or do you think it needs more outside help to build this local scientific talent?
I think it needs still more outside help, to have, I think, more on-the-ground research in a variety of different disciplines. I believe that we've done a lot, but as a small organization, we can't do everything.
Of course. Yeah.
And so working together in partnerships with you and your institution play a very key role as well. And then bringing in other partners to do that, but lapping it together with our Namibian scientific community, so that it's really getting the information into the hands of the people who it's their country.
Yeah, yeah.
And to develop this kind of capacity throughout Africa.
Yeah, one of the obstacles that's not necessarily an obstacle, but perhaps a challenge that I've seen down there. You know, we've also brought Namibian students. You're absolutely right. There's an incredible degree of talent down there that is just waiting to be developed. But the difficulty, of course, is that where do those students go after they have finished their experience with you? And in a developing country like Namibia, the resources to have those people go into scientific careers in research, things that we take for granted in the Western context are really luxuries in a developing country like Namibia. So to push it towards the tipping point, that is where you can actually start to sustain that, what more needs to be done?
Well, we need more investment in the universities, into these institutions. Institutions like ours, where we've gotten, we've brought in grants to develop our genetics lab, to develop our ecology programs. So, but finding partners on that so that we can grow those institutions, because research is the basis of everything. And in our natural resource management, that is a part of our constitution in Namibia, we need to have the best scientists on the ground to maintain those resources for the future generations. And to teach science, I'm going to say, is one of the really highlights of my life, to see especially young women who have no concept that they could ever be a scientist. And we have a lot of women, as you know, that are great scientists that work with me. And to have young Namibian women and African women come in and say, we could be a scientist as well, gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Okay, ever onward. Our guest today has been Laurie Marker, Director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund in Namibia, who's visiting ESF as part of a developing program of research and education with the CCF. And Laurie, welcome to ESF and welcome to Syracuse. We're glad you could visit us. This is Conversations. Scott Turner wishing you a good day.